The sleek black phone slipped from his hand, hitting the polished tile of the coffee shop with a soft click, revealing the screen with a text notification and a stack of unread emails. David Reynolds, a young tech CEO who owns a rising software company, continued walking completely unaware. A few minutes later, Chloe Wilson, a young med student working to support her two younger siblings, bent down to pick it up. In her hands, that amount of unread messages was a sign of a life she only dreamed of, enough to pay off her siblings' medical bills. No one saw, no one knew. But Chloe slowly stood up, and that decision would forever change the lives of both individuals. Once upon a time, in the heart of Atlanta, there was a young African-American tech entrepreneur named David Reynolds. He owned a chain of tech startups and digital marketing firms frequently featured in financial magazines. One morning, while meeting at a local coffee shop, David accidentally dropped his phone containing all his private documents, bank apps, and over 100 unread notifications. At the same time, a few blocks away from the coffee shop, Chloe Wilson was striding along a cracked sidewalk, heading toward a small diner in downtown Atlanta. She wore a faded scrub top, carrying an old backpack with a simple breakfast for herself and the only water bottle that would last her through the day. At 25 years old, Chloe had already lived through a lifetime of loss that many would take decades to experience. At 13, a tragic car accident claimed her parents, leaving her two younger siblings, Liam, just 8, and Mia, only 6, bewildered amidst the wreckage. From that day, Chloe's childhood abruptly ended. She became a guardian, a mother, a father, all in one fragile frame. At first, she worked as a tutor on street corners, enduring the biting cold of winter winds and the stifling heat of summer. Later, she took up housekeeping work, her hands rough and swollen from soaking in soapy water for too long. But the meager earnings were never enough. When the opportunity came, she joined a diner crew, a job even many strong men hesitated to take. Day after day, Chloe carried heavy trays on her head, mixed cement with an old shovel, and pushed heavy wheelbarrows under the scorching Georgia Sunday. Coffee dust clung to her skin and sweat streamed down her cheeks. Every morning, the shrill whistle of the diner signaled the start of another long day that would pass in a rhythm of exhaustion but perseverance. Despite life's many injustices, Chloe never let her heart grow callous. Whenever her shoulders ached with fatigue, she would look up, searching for a small patch of blue sky peeking through the iron framework of the building under construction, and take a deep breath. In that moment, the world around her seemed to fade away, leaving only her and a familiar whisper. One day, things will change. This morning began like any other. Chloe quickened her pace as she approached the familiar coffee shop to buy a bottle of water and a few snacks for the morning. But she didn't yet know that in the corner of the coffee shop ahead, something had fallen, waiting for her hand to pick it up. Something that could be a turning point for her entire life if she chose to keep it or return it. What would she do when fate placed before her a chance to change her life? From the towering penthouse in the heart of Atlanta, David Reynolds often gazed out at the city streets, aglow with lights at night, where cars trailed endlessly in lines. The city's radiance was breathtaking, but within him there was always a quiet shadow that could not be filled. At 31, he had everything many men dreamed of. A chain of tech startups spanning the city, digital marketing firms, and his image gracing the covers of financial magazines. Yet when the parties ended and the music faded into silence, his vast apartment remained occupied by just one person, himself. David was born in Harlem in a well-off family that never strayed from traditional values. His mother, a resolute and compassionate woman, always reminded him, "True value lies in how you treat those less fortunate than you." Those words were not only a guiding principle for his career, but also a measure by which he judged character. Early success swept David into a whirlwind of glamorous relationships. He met many beautiful women, impeccably dressed and eloquent in conversation. But beneath their polished exteriors, he often caught a glint in their eyes. a longing not for the man he was, but for the thick phone and the prestige that came with it. Lavish dates easily turned bland when conversations revolved around the latest designer items or upcoming luxurious vacations. David yearned for something simpler. A woman with integrity who cherished ordinary moments, sharing a humble breakfast, strolling through a park in autumn, or simply sitting together on a porch, listening to the rain. He wanted a love not measured by material worth, but by understanding and companionship through both joy and hardship. That morning, David woke earlier than usual. He set aside his polished suit and glossy leather shoes, opting instead for a simple t-shirt, jeans, and a baseball cap. No chauffeur, no flashy sports car, just the black SUV he used when he wanted to blend into the crowd. He craved a peaceful day, driving himself to the familiar coffee shop to pick up a few small items before visiting a vacant lot he planned to develop in the future. The coffee shop sat on a quiet street corner where David was rarely recognized. He leisurely picked out some snacks, a bottle of water, some spices, and paid at the counter. As he left the store, he absent-mindedly slipped his phone into his back pocket, or so he thought. Outside, the morning sunlight glinted off the parking lot, reflecting on the glossy black paint of his SUV. David walked on his eyes, following a small family leaving the store, a faint smile on his lips. He had no idea that just seconds earlier his phone had fallen to the concrete landing, neatly in a patch of sunlight, silently waiting to be found. As he got into his car, David opened the water bottle, took a long sip, and savored the cool sensation running down his throat. He started the engine, not suspecting for a moment that he had just lost the most important thing of his day. A few blocks away, a young woman with slight shoulders but resolute eyes was hurrying toward the store where fate was quietly orchestrating an encounter neither of them could have imagined. Can you guess what will happen next? Take a moment to relax, comment the number 1, or I'm still here to keep listening. My dear audience, stay tuned for the next part that will leave you in awe. Take a second to like the video, subscribe, and leave a comment below to let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always exciting to see people joining us from all over the world. The morning sunlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled patches of light and shadow on the concrete surface of the parking lot. In one corner, amidst the mottled shade, a black leather wallet lay silently, as if forgotten. Just minutes earlier, it had slipped from David's back pocket, falling to the ground without making a sound loud enough for its owner to notice. The automatic door of the grocery store slid open, and Chloe stepped out. In her hand was a cold bottle of water and a paper bag containing a simple breakfast. The heat rising from the pavement mingled with the faint aroma of baked goods drifting from inside the store. She walked quickly, head down, thinking of the hours of labor ahead, the heavy bricks and the rhythmic scraping of the shovel mixing cement, steady as a clock's ticking. A faint glint caught her eye. Chloe paused, leaning slightly, and spotted the wallet lying right by the path. She looked around. No one seemed to be searching. No calls of a name or hurried footsteps, only the sound of cars rolling away in the distance and the chirping of birds blending with the city's hum. She picked up the wallet, feeling its unusual weight. The leather was soft, the clasp still new, and a faint trace of men's cologne lingered. Opening it, she saw neatly stacked dollar bills, a few bank cards, and identification papers bearing the name of an unfamiliar man. That amount of money could cover 3 months' rent, buy medicine for Mia, and provide proper meals for all 3 siblings for weeks. Chloe stood still. In this world, she had seen plenty of people who would keep found money to ease their immediate struggles. But her hands slowly closed the wallet. A fleeting image of her parents crossed her mind. People who had taught her that integrity could not be traded for cash. She turned on her heel and walked back to the store. Each step echoed with a heavy thump in her chest, both certain and distant. At the cashier's counter, she placed the wallet down and said she had found it in the parking lot. The cashier looked up, eyes flickering with surprise, then nodded and took it. No questions about her name. No request for contact information, just a brief thank you amid the beeping of scanned items and the rustle of plastic bags. Chloe gave a faint smile, then turned to leave. The automatic door slid shut behind her, leaving behind the scent of roasted coffee and the familiar sounds of an ordinary morning. She walked away, unaware that elsewhere, the man who owned the wallet was about to realize his loss, and that her small act today would set in motion a story neither of them could have anticipated. When David returned to the store, his face a mix of confusion and tension. The cashier recounted the story of the young woman who had returned the wallet without leaving any information. He could only scribble his phone number on a piece of paper, leave it at the counter, and ask that it be given to her if she returned. An invisible thread had just been tied between the fates of two people fragile, but strong enough to pull them closer if destiny allowed. 3 weeks had passed since that morning when the black leather wallet was returned without anyone catching the name of the person who found it. In the bustling flow of the city, the memory of that moment lingered vividly in David's mind, intertwined with curiosity and an indescribable sense of gratitude. That morning, Chloe returned to the familiar grocery store to buy some essentials for Liam and Mia. She still wore her faded t-shirt, a worn cloth bag slung over her shoulder, moving slowly between the aisles. As she approached the checkout counter, the cashier's eyes lit up as if recognizing something. From a small drawer nearby, the cashier pulled out a neatly folded piece of paper and handed it to Chloe. The handwriting was hurried but clear, just a string of phone numbers. Chloe took it, gave a faint smile, folded it, and tucked it into the paper bag with her groceries. That afternoon, the late-day sunlight stretched across the old brick walls of the West End neighborhood. While preparing dinner, Chloe didn't notice that Liam had gathered all the used paper bags and taken them out with the trash. That night, when she remembered and searched, she found only an empty bin. The garbage truck had long since passed. She stood silently on the porch, the night breeze carrying a chill that mingled with a pang of regret in every breath. 2 weeks later, on a warm Saturday morning, the community center in the heart of the district buzzed with more activity than usual. Volunteers handed out bottled water, bags of rice, and free groceries. A large sign out front proudly displayed the name of the sponsor, a well-known real estate company, a name Chloe never imagined she'd have any connection to. She lined up, received a small package, and prepared to leave. Amid the crowd, a voice called her name. Chloe turned and saw the familiar face of the cashier from the store waving her over. She barely caught a few words before her gaze followed the cashier's gesture, pointing toward a group of people near a black SUV parked at the edge of the lot. David stood there among the crowd, his demeanor calm, but his eyes clearly searching. When their gazes met, time seemed to slow for a beat. He walked toward her, a smile warming his face in that rare moment. For the first time, they stood face to face, exchanging simple greetings that carried the weight of unspoken thoughts. David pulled out his phone, handed it to Chloe, and gently asked her to enter her number. She typed each digit carefully, saved it, and accepted a small envelope he gave her. Inside was enough money to buy food and medicine for her siblings. That afternoon, Chloe sat on a crowded bus heading home. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the phone resting on her lap as she rummaged for fare money. The hum of the engine mixed with the chatter of passengers. When the bus reached her stop, she stood quickly, clutching her package and weaving through the narrow aisle. The bus door closed behind her, and the wheels began to roll. On the seat, her phone silently slid off the edge, falling to the floor, unnoticed among the careless footsteps. Chloe walked along the sidewalk, unaware that she had just lost the only thread connecting her to the man fate had twice placed in her path. Would destiny be patient enough to weave that fragile thread once more? Or was this the final chance missed? In the days following their brief encounter at the community giveaway, David couldn't stop picking up his phone. Each call was met with the cold sound of a disconnected line. At first he thought Chloe might be busy, or her phone might have died. But after trying multiple times morning and late at night, the response remained the same: absolute silence. One afternoon, unable to hold back, he returned to the grocery store in Sweet Auburn. The cashier's eyes flickered with surprise upon seeing him, but her answer left David deflated. No one knew Chloe's address or workplace. It seems she only stopped by to buy groceries before vanishing into the endless stream of people. On the drive back, thoughts swirled. Had she chosen not to stay in touch, or had something happened? The question clung to him like a shadow. A few days later, David drove through the West End where old brick houses mingled with small shops. At a street corner, a makeshift fruit stand cobbled together from warped wooden planks sat tucked in the midday sunday. Behind it, an elderly woman sat with her head bowed, her shoulders trembling slightly with each weary breath. David slowed down. Only as he drew closer did he recognize her face features, etched deeply into his childhood memories. Mama Ruth, the woman who had held him as a baby, who had soothed him through feverish nights when his mother couldn't. But now her frame was frail. Her calloused hands rested quietly on her lap, and her silver-streaked hair spilled out from under an old cloth cap. He stopped the car and stepped out, calling softly. Mama Ruth looked up, her eyes clouded by age but brightening as she recognized David. Their reunion needed few words. He gently helped her into the car, closing the door carefully, as if afraid a strong breeze might tire her. On the drive back, Mama Ruth shared fragmented memories of her current life, losing her home, her income, and slowly her strength to keep going. At his place, David arranged a quiet room for her with clean sheets and a warm meal set by the bedside. That night, he didn't sleep early. Sitting in his study, he recalled the years Mama Ruth had cared for him. The look in her eyes today, a mix of joy and a hint of shame at her circumstances. David knew he couldn't let her return to that street corner. The next morning, as sunlight filtered through thin curtains, he called an architect friend. His voice was calm but firm. A small house, 4 bedrooms sturdy, completed in 2 months. Not for him, but for someone special, as he put it. The blueprints arrived that day, and the following week the foundation was laid. David frequently visited the site, watching each new row of bricks, imagining the day Mama Ruth would step into that house with a relieved smile. But deep down, amid the busyness and joy of providing for her, there was still another void unfilled. The image of Chloe. Her resolute eyes, her slow smile lingered in his mind. He didn't know where she was or whether fate would grant them another chance to meet. That afternoon, the Atlanta sky was draped in a thin veil of clouds, softening the light into a pale silver glow over the bustling construction site. David parked his black SUV by the roadside, stepping out with slow but steady strides. The scent of mixed cement, the clanging of metal, and the rhythmic shouts of workers blended into an unceasing symphony of labor. He had come to check on the progress of the house for Mama Ruth, unaware that this place held a surprise waiting for him. Among the half-built walls, he spotted a compact but sturdy figure. A faded t-shirt clung to slender shoulders, hair neatly tucked under a hard hat, and a heavy stack of bricks balanced on one shoulder with every ounce of strength. Sweat rolled down her cheeks, mingling with the gray-white dust coating her skin. David froze. His heart recognized her before his mind could name her. As she turned, their eyes met through the dusty air. It was Chloe. For a moment, the surrounding noise seemed to fade, leaving only the pulse of a moment that had been missed before. Fragmented images flooded back. The wallet on the concrete, the lost note with a phone number, the brief encounter at the community giveaway, all stacking up like pages of a hastily flipped journal. David approached his steps firm, but measured as if afraid the moment might dissolve if he rushed. Up close, he saw the calluses on her hands, the worn work pants, and the unflinching gaze in her eyes. He spoke softly, his voice a mix of a sigh and a confession, admitting how long he had been searching for her. The resolve in his eyes couldn't hide a trace of surprise that she was still here, still toiling, still carrying the same integrity as when they first met through a fallen wallet. The distance between them was now just a few steps. David looked deeply into Chloe's eyes, as if trying to convey everything he hadn't had the chance to say in all their missed moments. His words came out low, but clear and resolute. "Right now, put down the bricks and come with me." Chloe stood motionless. Her heart pounded not from the weight on her shoulders, but from the weight of this moment, the weight of a choice. In that fleeting instant, she felt as if all the weary paths she had walked all the days soaked in sweat, and the nights heavy with worry or waiting for an answer. But before her lips could form a response, the foreman's voice rang out from the far end of the site, calling her name with urgent insistence. The sound cut through the taut thread between them. David and Chloe stood there, eyes locked, but the moment stretched thin, suspended between choice and chance. Cement dust drifted lightly in the breeze. The sky seemed to lower, and the construction site carried on its relentless rhythm, indifferent to the story sparking in one small corner. Chloe tightened her grip on the stack of bricks. David stood waiting, but both knew that once this moment passed, it could not be reclaimed. Would he set the bricks down and follow him, or let fate slip through her fingers once more? Amid the dust-laden construction site, their eyes remained locked, as if a single blink might make everything vanish. David stood there, hands hanging loosely, but his heart raced, urging Chloe to step toward him. Chloe still held the stack of bricks, her slight shoulders bearing the weight of years of hardship, and now perhaps the weight of a decision that could alter her life's course. A gentle breeze passed through, carrying specks of dust that glinted in the sunlight like fragile moments slipping away. Their story remains unfinished. Through mischances and serendipitous encounters, fate has patiently woven invisible threads to connect two people from worlds that seem destined never to meet. Perhaps a single step, a single nod could change everything. But it's also possible that this opportunity might slip through their fingers once more, leaving them to search for each other in vain yet again. From this story, we learn that sometimes a small act of kindness holds the power to transform an entire life. What comes from sincerity always leaves a mark, even when all seems lost. It also reminds us that happiness is sometimes just one decision away, whether it's the courage to step forward or the silence that lets it pass. If you believe Chloe should put down the bricks and follow David, leave a comment sharing your thoughts. If you've ever experienced a moment where the smallest choice changed everything, share your story so we can listen together. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share this video so more people can feel the power of kindness. And if you want to know what happens next, let us know. Part 2 of the story is waiting to be told. There are moments when pain does not come from hunger or callous hands, but from the helplessness of watching a loved one slowly slip away while you can do nothing. Chloe understood this clearly when she heard Mia's labored breaths in the night. At that very moment, David stood on the witness stand, flashes of cameras scattering around him, every doubtful gaze fixed upon him. He was wealthy. She was destitute. Yet both carried the same wound, the fear of losing everything. This story will show you that sometimes it is the cruel truth itself that opens the most unexpected path forward. Atlanta, as evening descended, carried with it the suffocating heat that lingered from the day. The tall buildings cast long shadows across the crowded streets, where the blaring of car horns blended with music from roadside bars to form a weary symphony. In a small corner of the West End, the tiny rented apartment of Chloe was thick with the breath of 3 people. A place where every grand dream was tethered by food, medicine, and unpaid bills. Chloe returned home after her shift at the construction site. Her shirt soaked with sweat, her calloused hands roughened by mortar and bricks. The rickety wooden door creaked softly as she pushed it open, revealing a room lit by a dim yellow bulb filled with a sharp smell of medicine. On the bed, Mia curled up, each labored heavy breath, sounding like small drums pounding endlessly against her sister's chest. A nearly empty inhaler sat on the table beside a stack of hospital bills Chloe hadn't yet found the courage to open. At the small dining table, Liam sat with his head bowed. Only 17. He was tall, with a bright face and eyes once full of the hunger for learning. But lately those eyes had grown clouded with unease from friends' reckless invitations. Nights wandering the streets with boys who cared nothing for the future. Liam had once dreamed of setting foot inside a university lecture hall, escaping this poverty. But now that dream felt as distant as a lone star lost in the night sky. Chloe looked at her younger brother, offering no reproach, no questions. She understood 17 was an age easily swayed, easily pulled into dark alleys. Yet inside her, worry grew heavier, like a stone suspended above her head, ready to fall at any moment. If Liam stumbled, would she have the strength to lift him back up? That impoverished apartment was Chloe's battlefield. The monthly rent was a tightening vice. Mia's medicine, a wound that never stopped bleeding. And Liam's tuition, a shadow hanging over every hope. She had grown used to 12, 14-hour days, to hands raw and bleeding from labor. But what she had never grown used to was the helplessness of hearing her sister cough through the night, or seeing her brother's eyes dim as his faith in the future faded. That night, as Chloe tidied up, a sudden knock at the door startled her. She opened it to find a middle-aged man. Sun-darkened face, cold, sharp eyes. He introduced himself as a distant relative from Ghana, someone who had once known her parents. In his hand was a crumpled letter written in Ghanaian, speaking of hardships back home and urging Chloe to send money to preserve the family's honor before the village. Chloe's heart sank. She had always carried pride in her roots in Ghana, the land where her parents were born. But at this moment, when her few dollars had to be stretched for medicine, rent, food, and the unfinished dream of her siblings, that letter felt like a rope tightening around her, dragging her deeper into the abyss. The man looked her directly in the eye, his voice firm as he declared, "This is responsibility. This is the family's honor." In that instant, Chloe felt as though the whole world had turned its back. She was already the sister carrying the weight, the exhausted laborer, and now she was being forced to shoulder the burden of honor, a luxury compared to keeping her sister breathing until tomorrow. Tears welled, but she wiped them away quickly, unwilling to let anyone see. Strength had become the only armor shielding her against this merciless life. Outside, the city lights blazed brightly. But inside that apartment, Chloe and her siblings were like wanderers in darkness, uncertain of what tomorrow might hold. To survive, she would have to work harder, run faster, fight longer. But when her body finally gave out, would she still be able to hold on to the fragile belief that one day everything will change? To keep the story going, let me know where you are watching from. I truly love seeing viewers from everywhere gather here, or just comment the number 1. If you find this story interesting and want to hear more, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment letting us know where you're watching this video from. While Chloe struggled with the weight of survival in the West End on the other side of the city, David stood silently before the wide glass windows of his penthouse. Below, Atlanta's lights stretched out like dazzling constellations. Yet within him, a darkness kept rising. David had everything. A successful career, abundant wealth, a firm standing in the business world. But he also carried a past he never wished to recall. A family legacy stained with disgrace, a burden he was destined to bear for life. His father, Richard Thompson, had once been a powerful name in Harlem real estate. People had admired him for his ability to pave the way, secure massive projects, and raise rows of luxurious buildings. But then the news broke. Richard Thompson had been swept into a storm of land corruption, accused of seizing the homes of dozens of poor families. Headlines screamed, Images of weeping residents before bulldozed houses flooded the papers, and the name Thompson became a curse. Though his father avoided prison thanks to skilled lawyers, the stain clung tightly to the family's reputation, leaving David to grow up under the piercing scrutiny of society. David grew up with a vow never to let his career be tainted like his father's fall. Every step he took was cautious, transparent. He built his own company from the ground up, starting with small deals, modest apartments. Not chasing after grand projects meant only to polish a name. He chose a different path, a clean path, and that was what earned him respect. But the shadow of the past was not so easily erased. Some of his relatives, those who had once profited from the family's tainted fortune, were unwilling to give up exploiting the Thompson name to cover shady dealings. They sought David out, offering sweetened yet dirty proposals. Land schemes, under the table money contracts steeped in dishonesty. David refused. To him, that was a road back to hell, a costly price to feed greed. But his refusals made him a thorn in his own family's side. There were nights when David recalled his mother sitting by the window, eyes heavy with sorrow. Once a graceful woman of Harlem, she had always believed in the value of kindness. When the scandal broke, she became the target of whispers, abandoned by friends. She would often tell her son, "You must not let that darkness consume you. Prove that a Thompson can live differently." David held on to her words as a lifeline, but also as a burden he could never lay down. It was during that time that Chloe's figure appeared in his life. A woman with nothing but calloused hands and an honest heart. The simple act of returning a wallet, refusing the chance to take money that could have changed her life, struck David with a simple truth. Sometimes the dignity of a working woman outweighed even the thickest financial reports. In Chloe, he saw the purity he had been chasing his whole life. But fate was never easy. As David began to reach out and protect Chloe, his relatives grew even more hostile. They whispered that he was using a romance with a poor immigrant girl to whitewash the family's past. They spread half-truths, planted rumors in the ears of the media. David understood. The closer he moved toward the light, the harder his family's shadow dragged him down. He knew he had to fight not just for himself, but for Chloe, the woman carrying on her shoulders a harsher world of her own. Success for David was no longer about skyscrapers or multi-million-dollar contracts. It was about the ability to stand tall amid the storm, to sever the blood ties steeped in guilt. It was the lesson life demanded he learn. True wealth was not money, but the courage to break free from the darkness that had haunted an entire family. The city of Atlanta in the morning always seemed to move with a hurried rhythm. Construction sites rising and falling as if they never rested. Amid the roar of excavators, the hammering of steel, and the haze of cement dust, David appeared time and again, searching for a face he had never forgotten. The workers in faded shirts walked past, none paying attention to the man in a modest suit whose eyes swept ceaselessly along the row of unfinished buildings. He returned to this site day after day, until finally, when the moment came, fate opened the door he had long yearned for. Chloe emerged among the bricks and dust like a fragile streak of light. Her slight shoulders strained beneath the weight of cement, her calloused hands gripping the handle of a wheelbarrow. David stood still, his chest tightening as he realized that image carried something far beyond resilience. It was dignity, a thing no money could ever buy. Amid the clamor, time seemed to stop. They looked at each other, not a word spoken. Yet the distance between two worlds suddenly felt fragile. David sought to approach her, not with lavish gifts, not with the glitter of wealth, but with patience. A simple invitation to dinner, no pressure, no promises, just the desire to sit face to face as two ordinary people. Chloe accepted. Perhaps because those eyes were too honest, or perhaps because her heart, though tightly guarded, still longed for a place of peace. That evening, the city was awash in flashing neon crowds rushing along the busy streets. Chloe stepped into the restaurant David had chosen, not a place of grandeur, but a warm little corner glowing with candlelight. She sat there, her eyes carrying a trace of caution, the calluses on her hands faintly visible as she turned the cup in her fingers. David sat across from her, without display, without flowery words, only to listen. Between them, silence was not an emptiness, but a taut string. Chloe carried her burdens, her sister's illness, her brother's faltering path, the pressure to send money back to Ghana, and society's harsh judgment of an immigrant woman. David carried his own shadows. The stain of his father, the weight of a family name, the loneliness among the wealthy. As the two worlds faced each other, a question rose. Could a thin, calloused hand ever truly hold the one that had signed million-dollar contracts? In that brief dinner, their glances spoke more than any words. David saw in Chloe the inner strength he had sought his entire life. Chloe saw in David yearning to escape the darkness of the past. A man who truly wished to live with integrity, not merely a name polished on the covers of magazines. Affection began to stir. Not loud, not explosive, but deep like an underground stream beneath dry earth. And yet their path was never smooth. Chloe knew well that each step beside David would bring prying stares, venomous whispers. She feared that the gulf between them would turn her into a burden, or worse, into a symbol for mockery. David also understood that love could not be built on desire alone. It would have to withstand family barriers, society's gaze, and the vultures waiting to drag him back into shadow. That night, as they left the restaurant, Chloe stepped into the street, the cool night breeze brushing against her hesitant face. David walked beside her, not touching, not forcing, only quietly accompanying. The street glowed with light, but between them lay a silence hard to name. Chloe knew she had opened a door, but what lay beyond it, comfort or storm, she could not yet imagine. David knew he had planted a seed, but would it have the strength to take root in soil, strewn with thorns? Dawn broke over the west end, its dim light seeping through the worn window frame. Chloe had just returned from the construction site, her shoes still covered in concrete dust, when a sudden, urgent knock rattled the door. As she opened it, two police officers stood there, their faces stern. They asked for Liam's name and, without further words, handcuffed the 17-year-old boy and led him away as his sister stood in shock. Chloe was stunned. The sight of her brother's back disappearing into the police car left behind a heavy emptiness. She knew Liam had fallen in with the wrong crowd, but never imagined it would come to this. The apartment suddenly felt suffocating, as though the four walls were closing in on her despair. From that afternoon onward, Chloe rushed from place to place. She went to the police station pleading to see her brother. She asked about bail money, about procedures. Things utterly foreign to a woman whose life had only known tarls and wheelbarrows. Everywhere she went, people looked at her with cold eyes, a mix of pity and indifference. Money. Everything came down to money. Chloe opened her wallet, counting and recounting the meager bills. Realizing she didn't even have enough to begin the process, David heard the news. Word from the community reached him, and his heart clenched. He couldn't stand by and watch the woman he respected sink into helplessness. Quietly, he sought out a skilled lawyer, covered all the fees, and arranged for Liam's release on bail within days. He did everything in silence, hoping to lift at least a fraction of Chloe's burden. But when Chloe found out, gratitude never came. Instead, a quiet fury took hold. To her, this was not just about money. It was about dignity, about the belief that she herself had to protect her brother, not rely on the intervention of a wealthy man. The pain of Liam's arrest mingled with the bitterness of imagining her family branded as the rescued living under someone else's shadow. Chloe could not accept that feeling inside her. A fracture began to form. David only wanted to help, but his help made her feel small and dependent. Elsewhere, David sat in his bright-lit room, fists clenched, wondering whether his kindness had become a burden to Chloe. He held no anger, but in his heart grew in unease. Perhaps between him and her, every difference would eventually turn into a wound. Liam was released, but instead of feeling grateful, he carried his own simmering rage. He overheard that David had paid for the lawyer. To a prideful teenager, that was not salvation. It was humiliation. In his eyes, his poor family had once again been forced to lean on the rich. The shame festered, making him sullen, driving him deeper into feelings of inferiority and resentment. The cramped apartment grew heavier with silence. Mia coughed violently through the night, while Chloe staggered beneath two crushing weights: a brother spiraling in pride and mistakes, and a sister who needed medicine every single day. Through it all, David stood on the outside, caught between the desire to protect and Chloe's rejection. He had never imagined that kindness itself could turn into a blade cutting through a budding relationship. This family storm was not just a fleeting crisis. It was a warning. Love requires more than hearts. It must endure the invisible walls built from pride, shame, and class divide. And at every step, they stood on the edge of being torn apart by those very barriers. Can you guess what will happen next? Take a moment, relax, and comment one, or I'm still here to continue listening. In the days following crisis, Chloe tried to gather the shattered pieces of her life. The tiny apartment grew quieter, not with peace, but with a heavy, lingering weight. She buried herself in work, her frail shoulders bending under layers of cement dust. David, though kept at a distance by Chloe, still watched silently, as though an invisible barrier prevented him from stepping closer. In that fragility, another storm was already forming, this time not from poverty, but from a woman of power. Olivia appeared carrying an entirely different aura. She was a fragment of David's past. His former lover, once seen at his side at red carpet events among glittering gowns and swirling glasses of wine. Olivia belonged to that dazzling world where money and power intertwined like ropes that strangled every value. When she left David, she didn't just abandon a love. She abandoned the chance to keep the image of the golden couple society once admired. Now, upon hearing that David was tied to a poor immigrant woman, Olivia felt her pride scratched and decided to turn that scratch into a wound that would never heal. Rumors began to spread like smoldering sparks. People whispered that David didn't truly love Chloe, that their relationship was nothing more than a staged performance to erase his family's disgrace and polish his public image. A wealthy businessman paired with a struggling immigrant laborer. Wasn't that the perfect humanitarian story for the press to praise? And within those whispers, Chloe's name was twisted into a tool, a supporting character in a game of power and prestige. Chloe heard it from her co-workers at the construction site, from the scrutinizing stares when she walked into the supermarket, even from neighbors who were just as poor as she was. Doubt nodded at her mind. Was everything she felt from David real? Or was she nothing more than a pawn positioned to complete his gleaming portrait? Chloe's heart ached. The pride that had once made her angry with David now burned as a fire, consuming the fragile trust that had only just begun to take root. But Olivia did not stop there. With her wide-reaching connections in the media, she launched a serious accusation. David's company had employed illegal immigrant labor at several construction projects. The information was delivered to the press in a cold, confident tone, accompanied by vague evidence. Suddenly, Chloe's name and the group of workers she labored with were pulled into the storm as though they themselves embodied the wrongdoing. The entire city buzzed. Headlines and breaking news poured in. Businessman David Thompson and the immigrant labor scandal. Humanitarian hero or emotional manipulator. Secretly taken photos of Chloe at the construction site surfaced, attached to the story as supposed proof of deception. On social media, public opinion split. Some defended them, but far more voices dripped with scorn and cruelty. Chloe felt the world turn its back. She was no longer just a sister carrying her family's burdens. Now she was the center of malicious rumors. Her heart, which had only just opened to hope, was buried again under doubt. Every explanation seemed meaningless when the public had already chosen the story they wanted to believe. David, the man she once trusted to be different, was now surrounded by countless scrutinizing eyes. In his office, David sat before the glass windows, watching the city drowned in lights. He knew exactly who Olivia was, knew what she was capable of, but he hadn't imagined she would go this far. Part of him burned with anger. Another part acted quietly because Chloe was suffering in his place. The schemes, the scars of his family, the personal vendettas, all had converged, turning his relationship with Chloe into a whirlwind beyond anyone's control. And on the other side, Chloe sat in the small apartment, tears welling as she looked at her sister, sleeping after another fit of coughing. She asked herself, had she been wrong to let David into her life? Was it all just a game to conceal darker truths? In that moment, the pain didn't only come from what outsiders said, but from the doubt slowly tearing apart her trust from within. This storm was not just a scandal. It was a violent clash between two worlds. Truth and lies, love and exploitation, trust and suspicion. And now Chloe stood at the very center of that storm, where every step forward could mean collapse. The morning at the federal courthouse in downtown Atlanta draped the city in a haze of tension. Television vans lined the street, antennas jutting upward like metallic arms, rushing to transmit every frame. At the courthouse steps, the crowd swelled. Journalists, protesters, faces from the African American community, even immigrants whose eyes carried both hope and suspicion. All were fixed on one name, David Thompson. Inside the vast courtroom, the atmosphere was suffocating. On the bench, David sat among his lawyers, the fluorescent lights shining down, making his face appear even more strained. Accusations echoed through the chamber, striking deep into his heart, employing illegal immigrant labor, fabricating a false image, exploiting love to polish his reputation. Though he knew Olivia's hand was behind it all, David still had to endure the crushing weight of public opinion. Each question felt like a stab. Behind him, the gallery overflowed with those who once admired him, who once called him a role model. Now they looked on with eyes torn between hope and disappointment. David felt it clearly. A single misstep, and everything he had built with blood and sweat would collapse. Elsewhere, Chloe was facing her own humiliation. The scandal had pushed her out of the construction site. Co-workers who once shared lunch with her now eyed her with contempt, whispering that she was the reason David's name had been dragged through the mud. Her faded work shirt no longer bore just cement dust. It now carried the weight of invisible accusations. At that very moment, Mia suffered a violent asthma attack. The small apartment was no longer a refuge, but a suffocating box. The girl's coughs tore through the night air. Chloe rushed her to the hospital, her trembling hands clutching her sister's frail body as it convulsed for breath. In the sterile white hallway, Chloe slumped, her face buried in her calloused palms. All the burdens came crashing down. A brother gone astray, a sick sister, a society that had turned its back, and a love on the brink of collapse. David heard the news. After a grueling day of questioning, he left the courthouse amid flashing cameras. But instead of returning to his office with his legal team, he went straight to the hospital. The halls were empty, heavy with the sharp smell of disinfectant, his footsteps echoing endlessly. At the far end, he saw Chloe, her frail figure hunched forward, eyes red from exhaustion. The sight cut deeper than any accusation in the courtroom. David froze, and in his heart arose a question larger than ever before. What would he choose? On one side stood his career, his reputation, the path he had poured his youth into, desperate to escape his family's shadow. On the other stood Love, the woman who had restored his faith with a single honest act in a parking lot. If he went public, he would face relentless judgment, his career shaken. If he stayed silent, he would preserve the facade, but lose Chloe forever. In that moment, David understood. Sometimes the truth demands a declaration, not legal documents or printed rebuttals. He knew his decision would not only define the future of his career, but also determine his worth. In the eyes of the community, Chloe lifted her head, her desperate gaze meeting his steady one. In the stark white of the hospital, David saw more clearly than ever. He could no longer live in two worlds. The time had come to choose. And that choice was no longer just for himself. It was for those who still believed justice and love could survive. My dear audience, stay tuned for the next chapter that will leave you breathless. Take a second to like the video, subscribe, and leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. It's always a joy to see people joining us from every corner of the world. The next day, Atlanta was no longer just a city of bustling streets and traffic, but a stage where every eye was fixed. In front of the federal courthouse, a sea of people pressed together, holding banners, cameras, and microphones. They waited for a declaration that could change everything. David emerged from the heavy wooden doors, his black suit plain, but his eyes blazing with determination. No more hesitation, no more fear, only a heart choosing to stand with the truth. He stopped among hundreds of cameras pointed at him. For a moment, the entire square fell silent, as if the city itself was holding its breath. David spoke, his voice steady, slow, yet weighted with power. He did not turn to figures nor cite laws, but opened his heart to the public. He spoke of Chloe, a poor woman, but with immense dignity, who once found a wallet full of money and did not keep a single cent. He told of how she raised her two siblings with calloused hands, how she kept light in her eyes even when life draped her in shadow. David declared that his love for Chloe was no charade, but the only truth he had found after years haunted by his family's darkness. He lifted his head high and proclaimed he would never hide that love, even if it meant standing against those who shared his blood. Success, David said, is not the number of buildings I have raised, but the fact that I dare to protect the woman who makes me believe in the purity of life. His words cut through the fog of doubt like a blade. The crowd, expecting a man to defend himself instead, saw one willing to lay his heart on the scale with his reputation. In the crowd, African-American faces turned to one another, their eyes beginning to brighten. In David, they saw something familiar. A man brave enough to shed the veneer of glamour and live honestly. The immigrant community saw in Chloe the same resilience. They lived each day fighting not only poverty, but prejudice. The applause began swelling into cheers, a wave rising from the depths of a collective heart. From afar, Chloe watched quietly on a small hospital screen. Beneath the cold glow of fluorescent lights, tears fell down her face, not only from emotion, but from a tender ache. Had she been wronged to doubt him? David's words pierced through every barrier, touching the deepest part of her soul, the part that had always longed to believe in love. At the same time, Liam stood in the crowd. The teenager, once consumed by burning pride, now froze, watching the man he had despised as wealthy and condescending stand before the world defending his sister without fear. In Liam's eyes, his anger melted into admiration. For the first time, he realized true strength did not lie in fists or gangs, but in the courage to speak the truth even when the world turned its back. That night, returning to the hospital, Liam entered the room and bowed his head before his sister and David. No flowery words, but his gesture was enough to dissolve the walls between them. He admitted his mistakes, promised to return to school to start again. Chloe's eyes blurred not only with joy, but with the renewal of faith, the belief that her family still had a chance. In the stark white hospital room, Mia still lay asleep after her asthma attack, her breathing slowly steadying. David sat by the bed, his hand gently reaching for Chloe's Mia. He looked deeply into her eyes, eyes that had once been filled with doubt and pain, but now shimmered with a new light. His voice was low, warm, resonating in the still air. "If there is still one chance, do you believe me?" The camera lingered on Chloe's gaze. She did not answer, but within that look, a clear, glistening stream shimmered like the prelude to a reply not yet spoken. It was the kind of moment that made even the audience hold its breath. For her answer would not only decide the fate of two people, but open a new chapter for the entire story. In the cold, white hospital room, when David's hand gently touched Chloe's, Mia, the whole world seemed to pause in a single breath. His question still hung in the air unanswered, but Chloe's gaze was enough for the audience to understand that a flame was igniting, fragile, yet radiant. Beyond the glass window, the light of dawn streamed in a sign of a new beginning. But whether that beginning would lead them to happiness or storm, no one could be certain. The story of David and Chloe is not just a love between two people from different worlds, but a test of trust, resilience, and the value of dignity. It reminds us that sometimes the greatest strength does not lie in money or status, but in the courage to live true to one's heart. And even in the face of pain, as long as faith remains, one can rise again and keep walking toward the light. Dear audience, if you have followed this story to this very moment, try placing yourself in Chloe's shoes. Would you trust enough to move forward, or would you retreat to protect your safety? Share your thoughts in the comments, for every perspective deserves to be heard. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss part 3, where the story will unfold even greater trials with choices that could change everything. Because perhaps along this journey, you may find a part of the answer to your own.